now and
Did you follow up last night? I love
Love was stronger than anything.
you. Feeling love?
And I love you more than anything.
There's still love.
From the New York Times, I'm Anna Martin. This is Modern Love. Jessica Slice wrote a Modern Love essay about a guy she was dating years ago. This guy was kind and dependable and caring. He really listened, and he made it clear that he was serious about her. In other words, this was the kind of guy that Jessica always ran from. Here's Jessica reading her full Modern Love essay.
David said he knew I was interested because of my body language. I had turned to face him on the small wooden bench, tucking my feet under me and resting my arm on the backrest. He was carrying a backpack and asked if I wanted to borrow Joan Didion's Slouching Towards Bethlehem. But he had misread my body language. I was not trying to show I was interested. The truth is, benches hurt my body, and turning to the side was the only way to make sitting there tolerable. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a painful connective tissue disorder, and dysautonomia, which affects my ability to sit, stand, digest, and regulate temperature. Because of these illnesses, many positions are either painful or impossible to sustain for more than a minute or two. Leaning straight back against the wooden slats with David that day had nudged my ribs out of place. They ached. My bruised pelvis throbbed on the firm surface. Turning to the side allowed me to adjust my weight onto the meatier part of my bottom. I could use my arm to prop myself away from the wood. This was 8 years ago in Berkeley, California. I had moved there for its temperate climate, which made living with my conditions more tolerable. It was cool out, and he was wearing layers, a t-shirt, flannel, sweater, jacket, scarf, and hat, and I had on a long wool cardigan over a t-shirt. When he saw my hands turning purple, he took off his scarf and wrapped it around my neck. I launched into a story about a scary incident on BART. I interrupted myself to mention that the whole thing may have actually been my own fault because I sat on an inside seat, leaving the aisle seat open for harassers. He stopped me there. "Whatever happened," he said, "you were not to blame." I had started the story as an anecdote to be like, city life is bananas, huh? But something shifted when he said that. He already cared? He was paying attention? A few weeks later, as we shared fish tacos in Oakland, I told him about my disability, about the dizziness and nausea and the wheelchair in my trunk. He leaned in, memorizing every detail, and his eyes welled with tears. A month after that, he dropped me at a music studio, where I curled up on a leather sofa with my dear friend Natalie's dog. I read A Room of One's Own and listened to her band Pomplamoose record an album. I had massaged my temple in the car, and he noticed. I said that I was out of ibuprofen, but it was just a little headache. When he picked me up, a bottle of water and a packet of Motrin waited on my seat. And so, 4 months after we met, I broke up with him. He was standing outside a movie theater. He was wearing his cardigan, backpack, and boat shoes, and I couldn't take it a minute longer. His earnest love had become repulsive. Imagining the way he wanted to care for me, the inevitable loyalty and acceptance and protection, filled my throat with bile. David is handsome and hilarious. Every new thing I learned about him impressed me more. His adamant humility belied his intellect and confidence. Kissing him felt natural, and our conversations were easy. Nevertheless, I broke it off. I compared the way I felt about David to the way I had once pined for men who left me waiting, and I found the intensity of my passion for David lacking. The other men avoided talking about my disability. They showed up late. I had not yet figured out that uncertainty is not the same thing as love.
We'll be right back.
The first day without David, I felt like I could finally take a breath. My friend Ellie and I drove along the windy Marin roads to Stinson Beach. I said to her, "Sometimes things just aren't right." The next day, as I rested naked on a redwood platform in the backyard of the secret Berkeley hot tub house, doubt started to creep in. On the way home, I stopped at a yarn store and picked up some fluffy gray wool that had been harvested from local sheep. I would make a blanket while I worked out what to do. I used up the first spool and realized I would need a few more if the blanket were to be larger than a bandana. So I bought 2 more. I laughed to myself that I was well on the way to making a $90 blanket. I crocheted and I thought about David. I considered texting him to let him know I was having doubts about my decision, but I decided against it. My uncertainty was not his to manage, and the blanket was still too small. I bought yarn again, and then again, and again. By the end of the week, I had spent $390 on the blanket. It was silly for a jobless person who lived in a couple's spare room. I folded it carefully and tied it with a ribbon and emailed David. "Can we talk?" He agreed to meet me by Lake Merritt. We sat on a towel by the water a few blocks from his apartment. The handmade blanket rested in my lap. I fidgeted with the loops, glancing up at David and back down again. My breath still catches when I picture his face then. It was hurt and certain and skeptical. He waited silently while I tried to put a sentence together. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have had a conversation with you before breaking things off." "You're right," he said. I looked away. "I'm afraid I made a mistake," I said. My words were jumbled as I tried to explain that when faced with the potential for a healthy relationship, my body and mind panicked. That instead of feeling comforted by a loyal partnership, I felt disgusted and afraid. I said I was talking to my therapist about it. I said that I think it was because what he offered was unfamiliar. Until that point, my closest relationships had been marked by uncertainty and loss, and they felt perversely safe. He nodded, patient and watching me, and then explained that it made sense to him. He had listened to my stories of past relationships. After I broke up with him, he got a book by Dr. Robert Firestone called The Fantasy Bond. He thought that I might be seeking to recreate the trauma and uncertainty from earlier years. Dr. Firestone says that instead of questioning their circumstances, children blame themselves for their pain. Not only do they blame themselves, they also begin to expect loss and loneliness. Faced with a new version of adulthood, my worldview had been threatened. David read the book to understand why I was breaking his heart. He had no expectation that I would change my mind or that we would even talk again. 8 years have passed since that conversation. The blanket now rests in our window seat. It sits next to the binoculars that we use to watch the animals that wander through our backyard. Foxes, ducks, geese, bunnies, and once a wolf. In the months after I gave him the blanket, I kept wanting to run away. At therapy, I lamented that I wasn't experiencing an all-consuming obsession. I just felt warm, safe, at home. It wasn't easy to fall in love with David, but eventually it became easy to stay. David is kind to me every day, and I am kind to him. We laugh often, we read one another's writing, and talk late into the night. As the last years brought wildfires, hospitalizations, and the pandemic, our commitment to each other has not wavered. We are gentle and generous with one another. Sometimes I look back longingly at my roller coaster romances with men who wouldn't call me back, men from whom I tried to hide myself, where love was all about longing, not belonging. I look back at the biting words and fractured feelings, the elation of coming back together after breaking everything apart. We grow up believing that the world as we experience it is the most natural. Questioning our immediate experience doesn't work when we are children, because if our life isn't safe, where can we go? And as an adult, I sought out situations that would bring me back to my early years. Anything else felt too strange to be trusted. I have apologized to David for not allowing him the whirlwind early romance that he deserved. Because of my angst, he missed out on the magical, hormone-fueled months that often mark the beginning of a relationship. And sometimes I still get a pang when someone mentions their floating early days of love. The headiness, the thrill, the bubble of invincibility. But there are other kinds of magic.
If you want to hear my conversation with Jessica Slice, you can find it in the Modern Love podcast feed. Modern Love is produced by Julia Botero, Christina Josa, and Riva Goldberg, with help from Emily Lang. It's edited by our executive producer, Jen Poyant, and Annabelle Bacon. This episode was mixed by Daniel Ramirez. Our show was recorded by Maddie Masiello. The Modern Love theme music is by Dan Powell. Original music by Carol Sabaro and Pat McCusker. Digital production by Mahima Chablani and Nell Galogli. The Modern Love column is edited by Daniel Jones. Mia Lee is the editor of Modern Love Projects. I'm Anna Martin. Thanks for listening.